they had been abused by their father now deceased, and they believed that the mother had known a lot about it and hadn't done enough.
I really had a spiritual awakening sitting in that room.
Many victim survivors are traumatised by the very justice process itself. Turned around to the daughter and said, if Daddy heard what you were saying, he'd turn in his grave.
Someone to listen to that, they'll think, how the hell is that possible?
Most people never sit across from the person who harmed them. I did, in a prison. I sat across from my father to do restorative justice. And the woman who made that possible is here with us today, Professor Marie Keenan.
Marie is a restorative justice practitioner, a psychotherapist, and a researcher based in Dublin. She's worked for decades with survivors, with offenders, and with justice systems across the world. Her career spans multiple different disciplines and modalities, which is really interesting. And we're very, very blessed and grateful to have her here today. Thank you for coming, Marie.
Thanks, Marie, for joining us in our podcast. It means a lot. I've been really looking forward to having you on because you've been such a big part in my healing journey. You came along with me, obviously, to do the restorative justice with my father back in 2023, October 23. We were talking about it for a while. We got in contact at the start of COVID, and obviously it didn't happen in that time because I obviously wasn't ready. I was still battling addiction, and then my sister passed away in the meantime. And I think the timing of it was really, really perfect for me in so many ways. So before we go into my visit with my father, could you give us an explanation of what restorative justice is?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks very, very much, first of all, for having me. It's a privilege, really, to be here. So restorative justice is basically a philosophy. People think it's just about practices and processes, but it's a philosophy. It's a way of trying to repair harm following very significant crime. And that's what it's about. And if we start thinking about not who did it and what happened, as much as who's responsible for the harm that was caused and who's responsible for repairing the harm, then our lens is very different on crime and on what happens. So restorative justice is a philosophy that pays attention to crime, doesn't minimise or undermine in any way the devastation of it, but gets very interested not only in what happened, i.e. looking backwards, but is very interested in looking forward. How can healing take place? How can justice take place? And what needs to happen for justice to take place, and what needs to happen, who needs to repair that harm, and what needs to be put in place for the healing to take place. So out of that philosophy then comes a number of practices and processes. And so that's what restorative justice is.
So if someone's listening to this and someone's listening to your explanation there, and they were of the mindset or the opinion that justice and healing can't coincide, what would you say to that? So for a survivor to get justice and to have healing from the devastational impact that an abuse or anything that has occurred, the crime has occurred, some people would think they can't coincide.
Yes, that's right. Some people see that. So the first thing I'd say is that our old thinking about justice is only about jailing offenders or prosecuting offenders is really not what survivors are telling us, is their view of justice. For what survivors are telling us is this: that they have a myriad of different justice interests or needs, and they're very different for different people. So some people want to exercise voice, to be able to tell their story, to have it heard, to have it recognised. Some want acknowledgement, some want validation, some want the perpetrator to be held accountable, some want redress, some want all sorts of things. And no one justice mechanism can address all those needs. So in restorative justice, it still is the case that many victims will still want to go to the criminal justice system. But what we know from practice, from research, from watching newspapers, seeing on television, we know that many victim survivors are traumatized by the very justice process itself. So we have had to think about, are there other mechanisms available that isn't traumatizing, but that can still bring justice outcomes for victims? So what restorative justice can do is it can certainly bring justice in terms of accountability, in terms of acknowledgement, in terms of exercise voice, in terms of organising redress, all of those. It cannot jail perpetrators. Restorative justice cannot do that. The mechanism doesn't allow. The only place that can punish offenders through an imprisonment is the criminal justice system. So if their understanding is that they want their person punished by means of a criminal prosecution, meaning and resulting in a jail sentence, then the route for that is the criminal justice system with all its faults. But many survivors don't necessarily see that as their big ask. They want accountability, but the accountability they want is for their person, whoever it is, the uncle, grandfather, father, to sit in front of them, to own what they did, to acknowledge what they did, and so on and so forth. And some survivors want both, and both are perfectly possible to get the restorative justice and to get the criminal justice. So I don't agree. I disagree that justice and healing cannot take place in the same venue, in the same circumstance. It is perfectly possible for justice and healing to take place in a restorative process, but it depends on your understanding of justice.
Yeah. Do you think the system we have set in Ireland at the moment is aligned with survivors, or even in any way helpful for survivors?
Look, let's be really clear. Let's go to the base camp. The criminal justice system is there to gather evidence and punish wrongdoing. The criminal justice system is largely about the perpetrator. Mm-hmm. To the extent that it helps a victim survivor when such things happen to a perpetrator, that's almost incidental to the process. So, whilst over years things have improved in the criminal justice system for survivors, largely because of the Victim Directive and Victims of Crime Act, that now requires that the court pay some attention to victim survivors, and also the Victim Impact Statement. The courts are still really hostile places for victim survivors. Particularly of all sorts of crime, but particularly of sexual crime, domestic violence, interpersonal crime. They're really hostile places for victims. And a number of years ago, one of our ministers for justice said, I'm going to make the criminal justice system victim-centred. That is maybe aspirational, but it is unlikely to happen because we can tinker around the edges. We can make it better. Can we make it better? Absolutely. We could have special courts for sexual crime where all judges, all legal professionals, everybody is completely trauma-informed in order to work in the place. The receptionist, the person, the porter, everybody has to be trauma-informed. So we could do that. But in essence, and it's not well understood outside of legal circles, in essence, the criminal justice system is about offenders or accused persons until or unless they're found guilty.
Do you think restorative justice can help, not change that, but just help with it, help survivors with it? Do you think it's got a place to bring some help to it?
Yes, I do, because you see, it's not like they can be in relationship, restorative justice and criminal justice. In fact, in serious crime, they have to be in relationship, because you couldn't have, so to speak, a group of do-gooders, we'll call them, over there to the right, doing restorative justice on very serious crime that law enforcement don't know about, that there is no legal kind of umbrella for this and so on. That's not a good plan either. So we need definitely a service or services that comes under the umbrella of the justice system, but that has options for victim survivors and then accused parties of the various possibilities for them. But included in that have to be good legal protections for everybody, well-trained staff, legislated for perhaps, but where then all that happens in restorative processes there is a mechanism to inform legal systems that help change their culture too. If I were to say one thing about criminal justice, I've said one major thing, that is largely that it's a hostile place for victims. But the second thing I would say is that legal culture needs to change.
I'd agree with that. I've seen it firsthand. I watched it happen. So I'm going to hit you with loads of questions, so I'm sorry about that. That's what I do. I'm curious, right? Now, I'm with Sophia, and she's my partner, and I got experience hearing the benefit of what restorative justice has done for her as a person, and for her on her journey of healing. And I'll be honest, before I heard this and before I had conversations and discussions with Sophia, I would have been of a different mindset. I would have been, oh, no way, like, you couldn't do that. Don't put that's unfair. I would have seen restorative justice as perpetrator orientated. I would have seen it as almost re-traumatizing a survivor. That's just, I didn't have knowledge. I was ignorant to the process. What would you say to people with the mindset that I've just explained there, my old mindset? Now, I only managed to change that mindset with talking to Sophia and understanding the process, understanding what she went through, and even more so, seeing what it's actually done for her life, and the change in it. How could we change that mindset?
So the first thing I would say is that it is understandable that that is the view you had. Because when restorative justice as a movement, let's say, as a form of justice, started to be reintroduced in Australia, in New Zealand, in Canada, in Europe, in Ireland, the cohort of people who were largely focused on were young offenders. Northern Ireland, for example, young offenders, and restorative justice was seen as a way of not criminalising necessarily those young people, but giving them an opportunity to do something honourable with regard to the victims that they had stolen that bike from or robbed that shop or whatever. And it really was taken up largely to do with youth crime and youth offenders. Now, that is accepted across the world, that restorative justice for youth crime is really effective and helpful and established. But when I came to this and started to explore restorative justice, because I saw the gaps in justice provision for victims, I saw the trauma and re-traumatization that was taking place in the courts for victims. I saw why many victims wouldn't report because they didn't want that. And I came to restorative justice, not on my own, with many others. We started to say, there's great potential here. And it wasn't only us. People had been doing it for decades, but not writing about it. That this has potential with sexual crime, but the lens needs to shift. This cannot be offender-focused. This has to be victim-focused. But within an umbrella of respect for the dignity of all parties and the personhood and humanity of all parties. So whilst In the early days, the way it was taken up was for young people, young offenders, to try and help them. Now, in more serious crime, that cannot be the way that it is offender focused. It has to be, and I've written a book about this, and you
What's
can
the
put
book
up
called?
the link. The book is called Sexual Violence and Restorative Justice, Addressing the Justice Gap.
We'll put a link up for that.
Do, and it's available free for download and whatever.
Everyone likes a freebie.
Yeah, well, it's free. But we did for that book. We did a study across the globe. Everywhere there was restorative justice happening in sexual violence cases, we wanted to know about it, and we learned lots of things. But we also learned that it cannot be offender focused. It has to start with the victim. If the victim wants it, then we are obligated to make it happen, but to make it happen safely, by including, obviously, the perpetrator, if he is willing, he or she is willing, but it has to be victim focused within an umbrella of respect for all parties. So that's what I'd say to the people who are nervous and skeptical. You're right to be if it's that old style, but the restorative justice has moved a long way from its early beginnings, and in fact, it's used in a lot of very serious crime throughout the globe now, and homicide and so on and so forth.
And I think on that point there, that's why a lot of people miss out on something so powerful as restorative justice, because they don't realise what way it's done, especially with the sexual violence. Like, as you said, when you go into a courtroom and stuff, it's petrifying. So, like, why would a person's not going to think, well, I'm going to put myself through that again and hopefully I'll get some good from it. Yeah. You know, so it's like that needs to, as you say, that needs to be changed, because I was shown so much respect, so much care, so much empathy by everybody from the get-go to do the restorative justice. And you were constantly checking in with me. Emma was constantly checking in. You know, personally, it was completely a lot more different than what I thought it would be. I wasn't expecting it to be. I was nervous going into the prison, obviously, because of what I was doing and stuff. But once we sat in that room together, it wasn't like this horrific thing you think is going to happen. It was one of the most beautiful experiences of my life. And I know, like, I was going to say that might sound mad, but it doesn't, because that's the way it was for me, because that wasn't just my perpetrator, that was my father. And that wasn't just me, that was little me also sitting in that room. And I felt safe with you there. I felt safe with Emma there. And my father had the priest, or I can't remember, the chaplain there. And like, even though I was well prepared going into this, nothing had me prepared for what it was and what I got from it. I went in there feeling like I had to be angry. I went in there feeling like I had to be aggressive towards him. I had this letter written out and I got halfway through it and I couldn't read anymore, because it's not how I felt. It's how I felt when I was writing it, but it wasn't how I felt when I was sitting in that room. And I remember halfway through you asked for a break, because I didn't know what way I should be turning. I didn't know whether to be angry or whether to be sad or whether to show love. And we had a little word outside the room, and you just reassured me and told me, like, just to get my point across and ask the questions I wanted. And when I went back into the room, it's like I left that person of me outside that initially came in with me to start getting ready to be angry and sad. And it was so full of love. I really had a spiritual awakening sitting in that room, like, and to hear my father, like, say sorry and take responsibility for what he done, it, like, that little girl inside me got such a big hug from me that day. Like, it was powerful. And to feel forgiveness for him, I was carrying around pain, shame, guilt that wasn't mine to carry. And he took them back without even realising he was taking them back by the words that he said to me. And I remember even you said at the time, like, there's so much love in this room. And when it's the kind of case it is, and the stuff that happened, it nearly reassured me hearing someone else say that there was love in the room, that it was okay for me to say that there was love in the room. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And like, I do often talk to you about it, Peter, and I do say, like, there is no words in the world that I can use to say what that day done for me. It changed my life in so many ways.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful to you for that and for guiding me on that process, because it's really been a big, major part of my healing journey.
You see, what you've said and what Peter said is a lot of people don't understand in advance of the potential power of restorative justice. So let me just say a couple of things. I think there is a need for a public education campaign about the possibilities and power of restorative justice in sexual violence cases. Mm-hmm. I've interviewed judges and barristers and solicitors and professionals of all persuasions in this country who don't know the first thing about restorative justice in sexual violence cases, or how it could work, or how it could be possible. So there is absolutely need for a public education campaign to let people know of the potential and the power here. Second, families often are worried about their victim survivor, and they will often be nervous and say, why would you want to put yourself in the same room as the person who has harmed you so badly? Why would you want to do that? And I understand that. They want to protect. But what we need to do all the time is go to the victim first. Mm-hmm. And listen to what the victim wants, or the victim survivor wants. So professionals, and I've been and am one myself, we're guilty of thinking we know better than the survivor of what they want. Families, we can be guilty of knowing better than what the survivor wants. So if the survivor is telling us, it would be helpful to me to meet him, either face-to-face or through some other mechanisms, video or shuttle mechanisms. There are multiple ways of doing it, but face-to-face is the most powerful. Then, to my mind, as a professional with the requisite skill, I feel obligated ethically to turn heaven to make that possible for that survivor. Not to try to tell the person, oh, it's not in your interest to do that. If they're telling me it would be helpful to me, I want to make it safe. I want to have a process that will be very safe for all parties. But I want to make it possible. So, in order to do that, then we have, a number of kind of processes and procedures and so on. And I can explain a little about those. But it's really important that these processes are now tried and tested, and we can do them very safely, but with the survivor voice at the centre. Mm-hmm. And in my experience and my research, some victim survivors of sexual violence want to ask questions. Why did you do it to me? Why me? Very, very specific little details. Why did you do that on that night when Mum was at bingo? Like very, very specific things. Mm-hmm. Why did you make me have a shower before Mum came home? Like very specific things. So some survivors want to ask questions. Some survivors want to make statements. I would like to tell you the impact of this on me. Or I would like to tell you, despite your best efforts to destroy me, you didn't. I have thrived and survived in this way. So some survivors want to ask questions. Some survivors want to make statements. And some survivors don't want to ask questions. And when you ask, would you like to ask any questions in the preparation, they say, no, I wouldn't. I don't want to ask him why he did it. I know bloody well why he did it. He did it because whatever. But sometimes some survivors say, I know the answer to the question, but I still want to put it to him to see him answer it from his own mouth. So I want to say, why did you do it? And why did you do it to me? Because I want to see what he says, not because I need the answer to that question, because I have lived with the answer, but I want to put it that way. So some survivors wants to ask questions, some want to make statements, some don't want to do either. They want to just see what he has to say, or so on and so forth. The key about all this is that it's about shifting power. Sexual violence is all about taking power. I mean, there are multiple ways of looking at it, but that little girl's power is taken from her. Daddy comes and Daddy says, we're going upstairs, or Daddy coughs and we know that's the sign to go upstairs, or whatever. Or Mommy goes to bingo, or Mommy goes to somewhere, and we know this is going to happen. I had a male survivor, a young, beautiful man, who, and for him, the trigger was always his father would say, I need a new hanky. In the days when people had cloth handkerchiefs. And he'd say to the young fellow, will you go up and get me a handkerchief? And the young fellow would go up and he couldn't find the handkerchief the first time. And the father came up the stairs, Moria, to help him find the handkerchief, and abused that boy for the first time upstairs with his mother and the rest of the kids downstairs. And every time subsequent to that, if that father wanted to abuse that boy, he'd say, will you go upstairs and get me a hanky? So and the boy knew what was coming.
I was going to ask, because when we're talking about this and when you're talking about this, it's predominantly, you're addressing it's female, it's the little girl, it's this. I'm glad you said that about the man, about that little boy. Have you managed to facilitate many restorative justice processes where men are involved as the survivor?
Yes, I have facilitated a number where men are, where within a family there's actually the perpetrator and the victims, and they're all male.
Yeah.
So, like, families are complicated, as we know, and families come in all shapes and sizes and whatever. But yes, and a lot of my professional life has been with male victims as well as female victims. And a lot of my professional life has been with male perpetrators and a smaller number of female perpetrators. But, you know, gender's important when we make big policy statements, because we know more females ever, and, you know, in terms of domestic violence, more females and so on. But children are children.
Yeah.
Whether it's male or female. And I don't like the the gender distinction when it comes to children who have experienced sexual violence. They're all children, whether they're a 6 foot, as I've had, 6 foot odd policeman who was a victim.
Yeah.
You know, trying to find a way forward to navigate life from the child victimization that he suffered. So, yes, is the answer. Thanks, Peter, for that, because it's boys and girls.
Do you find
male and female?
Do you find that the setup that we have that? Oh, I don't know how to put this, but the way sexual violence is spoken about. Do you think that it's addressed in a way that's easy for men to come forward?
It's definitely not addressed in a way for men to come forward. I mean, if you're a perpetrator of call it sexual crime, or even where you're not sure if it's a crime, where there was a lot of alcohol, and who you know, was it a crime?
Blurred lines.
It's always a crime, blurred lines and all that. The last thing you'd want to be doing in the current system is saying, I crossed a line there, or I took advantage of you, or whatever, because the system rushes in, or potentially rushes in, to criminalise everything. And once matters are criminalised and so on, some of the other conversations that need to take place are shut down. Mm-hmm. And so some people I've just finished a project in a book on historical institutional abuse. And one of the things, and this was across modern baby homes, Magdalen laundries, industrial and reformatory schools, the military in Ireland, multiple sources. And one of the big findings there, I mean, there were multiple findings, but people said when the lawyers come to town, dialogue stops.
Yeah.
So this is not lawyer bashing, but it is something about that once law and lawyers and criminalizing matters become the only game in town, lots and lots and lots of harmed people, victims, get no justice whatsoever. Because they see the trauma of other people in the courts. I'm not saying that people shouldn't come forward if they want to come forward. I mean, if a crime is committed, it's their right to come forward if that's... But many look and they say, no, why would I do that?
Put myself through that.
Why would I put myself through that? I don't want my grandfather jailed, but I definitely want my grandfather to take responsibility. And I want my granny not to have the grandchildren around him. Yeah. And I want my family to stand up with him and to say, this was wrong what you did to Mary or Ursula or whoever. So there's a lot of need for conversation that sometimes is closed down when the matters become highly legalistic.
So with that and with your mind, so there's a system set up, right? And the rape crisis centres are there and there's all of this. Now, I've only recently learned after doing a piece with Mayo Rape Crisis Centre that they're there for men. Like, I had no idea about that. Not a notion. That's not publicised or advertised or anything. When we talk about sexual violence, sexual abuse, we always, personally, not even personally, but just in the media and what you see, it does seem to be male on female violence, male on female abuse. You don't really hear of male abuse. And it's male on male. You don't hear a lot about it. Is it easy for a man to come forward? Is it easy? Is the system set up where a man can actually come forward and feel okay about it in a system that re-traumatizes the survivor?
Look, females will say, some female survivors will say, look, at the time, say, of the clerical sexual abuse scandals, a lot of the survivors who were speaking publicly were male. And some female survivors were saying, it's very interesting that we have been females suffering for a long time, and now all the attention is onto the issue of male abuse. But I'm not sure that is totally the whole story, because certainly some men have told me that it is really, well, females told me this too, but that it's really difficult to come forward. For some time, some men said if they came forward, they were wondering were they being looked at as a suspect rather than as a victim. Now, victims find it difficult, females find it difficult to come forward. Fear of being believed, that applies across the board. So there are lots and lots and lots of areas common to both. But I just think when it's children involved, it doesn't matter about the gender of the child. But I think the police have done a lot of good work in Ireland in really trying to be victim sensitive and victim focused when it comes to serious crime with the National Protection Services units. Those men and women are generally highly skilled. But the problem is, there isn't enough staff, then they're promoted out, the places aren't filled, and then your regular sexual violence, so to speak, goes into the National Protection Unit, but then will go back out to the frontline guard who may be not as experienced. So the key is the more specialist you have within An Garda Síochána, the more specialist you have within the judiciary, the more specialist you have within the legal professions, the better the likely outcome for victims and offenders. But restorative justice can be part of that.
Do you think we'll ever get to a point where that's the case?
Well, I hope so. I don't think we will fundamentally change the criminal justice system. I think we can make it better, but I don't think we can fundamentally change it. Someone, a student, a very mature student, told me there's one way you could change it, which is by referendum of the people. But look, that's not going to happen to change the criminal justice system. It is there about gathering evidence and trying offenders or accused persons and then punishing offenders. But we can make it better, but we can bring in additional mechanisms to work in tandem. And I think there's a role for the DPP here, for instance. So even if a victim reports a case and the Gardaí investigate it and it goes to the director, I think there is a role for the director's office to have a very serious think about, is this case going to go forward for trial? Or would there be a better way that might serve the parties better, that is still under a legal umbrella, but that could be rerouted to restorative justice with conditions then, if the person didn't adhere. So for instance, an offender, a sexual offender who went the restorative justice route, let's say in theory the DPP was to decide, instead of sending it forward for trial, I'm going to engage with both sets of solicitors and see, would it be in the interest of the parties to go a restorative justice route? One of the specifications as the restorative justice route could be that that offender has to go for therapy, for the sex offending therapy, and other conditions attached to the thing. And if they weren't met, then the case could be re-entered. So there are lots. So that's one way in the DPP. The other way is there are lots of cases that don't get beyond the DPP into the court, into proceedings at all. And that means then that victim gets a call from the guards or a visit from the Garda to say the case is not proceeding. So all of those cases could be considered for a restorative process where the man might be not pleading guilty if it's in a court, but maybe willing in a different forum to take responsibility, which is a different matter than a kind of a legal guilt. Because in a restorative process, one cannot obviously impose prison sentences, but lots of conditions can be agreed between the parties. And that can be even rubber stamped by a court if need be. So a little bit of blue sky thinking, a little bit of creativity and courage is required here by the state, by the Minister for Justice, by the Department of Justice, to really think broadly about this. And my sense from my last research on the historical institutional abuse, and we interviewed political leaders, we interviewed judges, barristers, solicitors, the whole lot, victim survivors, across the board, there, church leaders, there is an appetite for another way. There is definitely an appetite.
I can see there's an appetite, right? But I can see that because I'm on both sides of the fence when it comes to it, right? So I've done prison systems, I've done all that, I've done court systems, all of that. So what I've learned over the years is when people hear the word justice, they think prison. Right?
Yes.
That's society believes prison is justice. Right? I've been in prison. There's no justice for any victim or survivor of a person been in prison. I've been in prison systems where I've had a better time in the prison system than I have had outside in society. I've been in prison systems where no one gives a shit about you. You're just a number. Like there's no reform, there's no rehabilitation, there's no nothing. You're just spending 23 hours locked in a box. That's it. That's all there is to it. That doesn't help anyone. So what you're explaining there, I understand it, right? Do you think society would understand it?
Well, I think there needs to be public education.
100%.
Because I think society, like people really understand more and more because of the courage of victims who've come forward, like yourself, Sophia, and others. They understand, like, the impact of this awful crime on people. Like, they generally, society understand this now. So society, citizens of Ireland, want help and good outcomes. They want people, Sophia, to get on well in life.
Yeah.
They want you to thrive and have a good life. They don't want people who've been harmed in childhood or adulthood from sexual violence to that be the lot.
Yeah.
And to sit in private therapy rooms just talking. They want that you're able to get beyond it and thrive.
To live.
And to live and to live well, to live the good life. And they want responsibility and accountability on by perpetrators and by institutions, indeed, where, perpetrators have worked in some instances. So I think if it's explained and understood and more explained, if people have worries and concerns, the citizens will come to their own view. And I think the citizens of Ireland will come to a view that they want anything that will make life better for victims.
Yeah.
And they mightn't want life better for perpetrators. The families of perpetrators will want life better for them. But the citizens will want, Irish citizens will want fairness for perpetrators. And we are a nation of second chancers. Like, I think we do like the rehabilitative ideal.
We do, there's no doubt.
Like, we want people to turn their lives around. And so if there are mechanisms available to try and help life get better for victims and to work with the rehabilitative ideal of people turning their lives around, then I can't see that the citizens won't want it. The citizens will be worried about matters like safety. How will you protect victims in the process? These are the questions. I know them all because of, the research over the years. How will you protect victims? Well, we have ways of protecting victims in the process, largely through the preparation and knowing trigger words and trigger in the process. So, for instance, how will you be trauma informed? So, for instance, in the preparation with a victim said to me once, if my father calls me baby in the middle of the meeting, you will know what he's doing, right? The power is switching back. He's taking back power. So through the preparation, we learn, through a lot of engagement with the victim, we learn about these things. And then through engagement with the perpetrator, we learn. So that's the first thing. You can absolutely make these processes trauma-informed and safe as humanly possible for all parties. Preparation is the key.
Education.
Preparation for the parties is the key. And if the victim wants a support person there with her, we'll say a female victim, in the process, that support person is part of the preparation. And then if the victim wants a support person in the room, the offender can have a support person in the room. And you always have support persons anyway for after the process, if not in the room. So there are lots of ways of making the process safe. Some of people from the feminist persuasion, and I'm feminist myself, are worried about the power differential in the room. How are you going to avoid that power switch again, him taking power? Well, it's again all in the preparation. And I mean, that's where the preparation comes in, but it's also where very skilled practitioners come into it. I wouldn't allow someone facilitate a sexual violence case who didn't understand impact of trauma, the dynamics of sexual violence and perpetrator strategies, as well as restorative justice and so on. So there's you couldn't bring in like a first year student to do this who didn't understand the dynamics. So you need trained facilitators. But once it's done, there are ways of doing that. Let me just say this. Nothing that is worth doing is foolproof. Like, we can make it as safe as possible. But I'll give you an example of a moment where it appeared like it had gone a bit off track. And this was with 3 survivors. Individually, they met with their parent, a mother, where they had been abused by their father now deceased, and they believed that the mother had known a lot about it and hadn't done enough. Anyway, they now wanted to meet with their mother. And on one occasion, with one of the girls, when we were finished the meeting, almost finished the meeting, I remembered that I hadn't turned the heating on in the room next door. And as the mother was leaving the room, leaving the meeting, it had gone reasonably well. As the mother was about to leave the meeting, to go into the next room with her support person, I said, I must go out and turn on the heating. That was not the plan. The plan was the 2 of them leave into the next room. I was staying with the victim. I remembered, I went out. As I left, the mother turned around to the daughter and said, if Daddy heard what you were saying, he'd turn in his grave. Right. So I turn on the heating, run back in, and the survivor is crying, right? And the mother and her support person were now gone. And she tells me what had happened. And so I was, concerned. Oh my God, like the mother had attempted to, be kind and everything else in the meeting. And then she had turned around and said this. But that girl, we spent a lot of time together, she said that this was helpful because she said, now I know what I'm dealing with in my mom. And now I know how to protect myself when I meet my mom and whatever. And as time went on, and I've had occasion to meet them in multiple other fora for different other reasons, that girl is now supportive of her mother and is able to be in relationship. They had been estranged with her mother. So what appears like hadn't gone well, actually for the survivor, she said that was more information.
Yeah.
And it was helpful because she was concerned about, she was not sure about her mum's ambiguity towards the whole thing. Now she was clear.
Yeah.
And then once she was clear, she was empowered to know how to be with her mother. I've had a really awesome outcome with a survivor, Lara. Her name is in the public domain. Lara, who never actually got to meet the perpetrator. But through the process, we worked as though she was going to meet him, and we tried to find him and to get him to meet and whatever. And without ever having a meeting with the perpetrator, because she had a great outcome, because she learned lots of information about him through the process.
Yeah.
So it's all about the process.
Really?
And it's all about what does the survivor want and need.
Is there always, like, every time you've done this, is there always a miracle that occurs?
Yeah, it's funny because in the preparation we say there will be no surprises on the day. So, for instance, if I've worked with someone who wanted to have clarification from the perpetrator, she was abused as a 4-year-old and she wanted to clarify. She was waking up in the night now and she wanted to clarify, did you penetrate me? She couldn't remember. So you couldn't go into a meeting where the perpetrator didn't know this was going to be asked in some form or other, and where she, didn't know, broadly speaking, what was likely the answer. Now, it's their meeting, so we prepare the parties, but we don't ask the questions. There are ways of doing that. I won't go into it all now. But so the idea is that on the day of the meeting, there will be no surprises, no topics discussed that we hadn't already prepared. But I can say to you here, there are no surprises, maybe, in terms of the topics discussed, but there are always miracles. Always. And it's like in the human engagement. It's like when that woman now eyeballs that man, or that man eyeballs that man, or whoever, and in some moment there is a kind of a knowing, something involves. It's a miracle. It is like something shifts. In Alva's case, Alva Griffith was another survivor, and she was the subject of a film called The Meeting. It's available for download and all that. And I was at Alva's meeting, and the moment of transformation was when the man called her name. She was assaulted by a stranger. And in the actual meeting, she said, "I wish you well," at the end of the meeting. She said, "People will think that's strange, but I wish you well." He had served quite a long sentence. And then he said, "I wish you well, Alva," and blah, blah, blah. And that was a real humanizing moment. And her entire attempt, or why Alva wanted restorative justice, was she wanted to humanize the perpetrator, because she said, "I can't walk around the world." She has a small child, being terrified of meeting a monster in the supermarket, because now he's out of prison. And there was another moment in Alva's meeting, which is also in the public domain, when they laughed, when he said something, and it was she looked incredulously at him, and the two of them laughed. And it was like, this was the man who had almost left her for dead.
For someone to listen to that, they'll think, how the hell is that possible?
It's because, you see, I've come to the conclusion, and this is after a lot of therapy work, a lot of soul searching myself, a lot of engagement with other people in their lives, and engagement with myself in my own life. Human beings, we can inflict the worst kind of harms on each other. But actually, human beings, we can help each other heal.
100%. Couldn't agree more.
Through solidarity, dialogue, understanding, being with. So the process of justice and healing, in my mind, it doesn't take place necessarily behind bars. It takes place through dialogue. And in a study that I did years ago, in 2014, imprisoned men, we interviewed a lot of them. And we asked them would they be willing to do restorative justice. And they said, and they were all sex offenders, they said the finding was, yes, that they would be willing. It wouldn't be that they'd sign up for it, but if they were asked to do it, they would. And we asked them, well, why would you be willing to do this? And here are the reasons. To do something honourable, having done something so dishonourable. It will help me sleep better at night if I know I've done something to try and help the person heal. It will help my family see that I want to do something to be a better person. And it might help family relations. And sometimes it was for forgiveness. But forgiveness is in the gift of the victim.
Yeah.
That's not a demand. That cannot be a demand. There's a misnomer in restorative justice that it has to be all about apology and forgiveness. Let me clear that now. It has to be neither about apology or forgiveness. That's within the gift of the victim to accept, to offer forgiveness or otherwise.
I can talk about a bit more the power of the restorative justice. I don't think, my father had a few years served in prison, obviously, but I don't think it actually hit him what he was there for, what had happened and all that until the restorative justice, because he had this thing in his head that when he got out of prison, he was going to have a life with us and everything. And I was like, no. And he was like, but why? And I was like, how can I have you in my life? I can't do that to myself again and again. And I said, I've already lost enough. I'm not going to let someone back in to lose them again. And I couldn't take that chance with my own head, with my own mental health, with my own life. And he started to cry and get upset. And then, like, even when I first went in, I said to him, I said, you should be locked up for murder, because if it wasn't for you, my sister would still be alive and what you put her through. And he was just kind of nodding and agreeing, just like taking it all on board. But not long after I done that visit, my father ended up paralysed. His whole immune system attacked him. So, like, even for that reason, for him to actually understand what he'd done, because he was in prison for a few years before that, and it hadn't hit him. It's only when I sat in front of him and said, Dad, this is what you have done, that's when it actually hit home for him. Because within a few weeks, he was paralysed from the neck down. He's got his feeling back, obviously, since, but I think when he went, and he even said to his sister after, that having to lie there and be at one with his own thoughts really made him realise the damage he'd done. Because I remember even saying to him in the restorative justice, why did you keep doing what you were doing? And he said, because I kept getting away with it. And he was like, if I knew that this would be the outcome of it, I wouldn't have done it. Now, I know part of me wants to believe that, and another part of me can't believe that, you know, and that's okay too. But so much went on in our lives, and so much was left under the carpet. I think that having that opportunity to say that to him and listen, because one question I had, what was I to you? And he said, you were my baby girl. And part of me was hoping he'd say, oh, you were something else, but to hear him say you're my baby girl was like, it meant a lot, because he didn't just look at me as someone that he abused and someone that was there to be tortured. He actually did look at me as his daughter as well. So even to get that from it was really powerful for so many reasons. Yeah. And I would never have got those answers, or he never would have got to sit with his own thoughts if I didn't do that.
You see, the criminal justice system, and your dad was through that process, and you were through it, Sophia, and the attempt in the criminal justice system is to keep the story small. Yeah. Keep only answer the questions that are asked. I mean, this is how the system works. Don't go into big stories. I mean, but in restorative justice, it's the opposite is the case. It's victim focused, and it is to get the full story told in the way that the victim wants it told. So, like, how could you get that detail in the criminal justice system? What was I to you? Like, where was the possibility in the criminal trial for you to figure out with your dad, what am I to you, Dad? And definition of relationships is huge. It's the stuff that drives us crazy if we don't know who we are to each other.
Yeah. Even in my victim impact statement at the court, a lot of stuff had to be taken out because it wasn't irrelevant to the court. So I didn't even get my opportunity to say everything I wanted to say through my victim impact statement, because that was even pulled back.
Yeah. And in Alva's case, when she asked him, and again, it's in the public domain and it's in the film, when she asked that man, why did you do it? And, you know, I believe he gave an honest answer because he really was pensive and considered and whatever. And then he saw her at a bus stop, right? He said, when I saw your high-heeled shoes, I saw red. Now, the thing is, that's very interesting, but it's very interesting in terms of misogyny. And all the rest of it. It was, you know, you could do a whole thesis, and somebody has, I think, on the high-heeled shoes. But the point is, where was Alva ever going to know that little bit of information? Now, her own feeling was different, but, you know, she felt it was misogyny and all the rest of it.
Understandable.
But how that was never going to come out.
Never get that in a criminal.
It wasn't personal. She could have been anybody wearing those high heel shoes. Yeah.
So it's like these really, I mean, you find it with homicides. You know, obviously the person is dead, but the family, like families, and you know, it's the families of people who've been murdered are on my radar, because I feel a lot of those families could well do, if they wanted, of course, it's entirely their call, with meeting the perpetrator, the person who killed their loved one. Because things like, what was the last words she said? What
All the unanswered questions.
all the unanswered questions. The only person who has the answers is the perpetrator.
Do you think people actually understand that this process has actually been around for thousands of years? That restorative justice is just a different name for a tribal process that has been used in life, in society, for whatever you want to call it, for since the existence of humanity, really, that when there was an incident or a crime or whatever you want to call it, that people actually got together as a tribe, as a community, and discussed it and brought perpetrator and victim together to create healing. Do you think people actually understand that this has been a long-term process that's been around for as long as we have?
Yeah, I think people don't know that. Now, we won't go academic on it. Some academics kind of say, well, you know, it was different, you know, in tribal worlds. But like in Ireland, they went to the Hill of Tara and sat in circle to resolve conflict and so on and so forth. And the chieftains and the whole lot. So yes, I mean, I think it's in our DNA to come together. But let me just, but sexual violence isn't just conflict. Sometimes people say, you know, about resolving conflict. It isn't about conflict. It's like serious crime and blah blah blah. So that always has to be in the frame. But yeah, we have years and years of generations of tradition of coming together to resolve matters. Why not?
Yeah, it's how it works.
It's how the peace process in Northern Ireland worked.
It's how anything works when you.
It's what'll have to happen in all the places in the world that are.
Yeah. Do you like so? Right, I'd be very much into esoteric knowledge and old wisdom and whatnot. Right, so I would see the word sex as a sacred energy exchange. Do you think that comes into play, into the power play of it, where someone basically steals someone else's power through sexual violence?
Wow, I love that description. Say it again.
Sacred energy exchange.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, like I've always seen sexual violence as stealing. Like stealing. I steal because I can, you know, because I'm more powerful or whatever. So absolutely. And like even within intimate relationships and marriages and boy and girl and girl and boy relationships, you know, sex should not be assumed. It is always a gift.
Yeah.
It is always an exchange. It is always a sacred exchange. It's always a gift. It always has to be negotiated. Consent campaigns are talking about that. But even if we forget consent campaigns, if you just get with the basic, it's a sacred exchange that cannot be assumed, even if I'm married for a week, a month, or 45 years.
I think a lot of people don't realise how much it means to a person until it's actually taken from them. You know, when you understand, because it takes not just one thing, it takes everything away from you for many years. It does, because you don't know who you are, what you are, you've no self-love, self-care, self-compassion, you've no self-worth, you're not happy with how you look, how you feel, and it's all from one move from a person.
Especially from childhood, from a children's aspect, the person is still developing. Their mind is developing, their body is developing, their understanding of themselves, the world around them, it's all developing. You're pretty much like going in and just going, yep, I'll take all that.
Yeah, but even you just saying that, like, in why we're here to talk about restorative justice, like imagine 1 hour of a meeting could help someone heal so much from that. I know it's only 1 hour and there's obviously work to do after and work to do before, but that 1 hour is really, really a big piece of that jigsaw.
Yeah.
So the rest can kind of come in around it.
Yeah.
Like even to the point where I've been talking to you about going to see my father again, because I've the restorative justice done. I have my power taken back from him. Now I have so many questions I want answering, and I feel like I'd be okay to do that.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't have this opportunity if I didn't do the restorative justice in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, there's such a bigger picture. It's a ripple effect around it.
Oh, it's a massive ripple effect, just even from your process, from your restorative justice, that's affected multiple people in your lives. It's given me an eye opener in my life. It's in turn changed how I would communicate and talk to other people about different stuff. And I'd actually, like, as mad as this may sound, because I'm from like an era and a system and criminality of where like it was them versus us within a prison system. They were on one side, we were on the other side. Like, they weren't human, they were monsters, you know, and that's how it is. I've actually, like, it's mad even to say this, I've changed my view of perpetrators of sexual offences. Like, I see beyond the offence, and like I don't think I'd ever have taught myself saying that, to be honest, and especially with stuff that's gone on in my own life as well. I didn't think I'd ever be able to get to a point where I'd see them as anything more than monsters, really. But it's not the case. They're human beings with their own traumatic experiences. Trauma creates trauma. Like, we're involved in a thing called Trauma Talks and the Compassion Circle, and like that's opened up my mind as well. But like your experience out with that, your experiences has ripple affected on I don't know how many different lives, like, and that's just one experience.
But what you've identified, Sophia, is how much is taken away by sexual violence or sexual abuse or sexual crime, whatever you want to call it. And for me, like, that's really sad, but it also makes me want to work even harder to make sure that we do everything possible, humanly possible. And sometimes it's a spiritual process, and sometimes it's body work and all sorts of work. But why are we not doing everything possible to try and help the person who's been harmed to get back as much as possible of what was taken away, and impact on body and all those things? As you said, sometimes in a meeting, that can all shift.
Yeah.
It just can all shift. It's incredible.
Like, the love I have for myself as a person, physically, mentally, spiritually, it's a dream. I never thought I'd be ever able to feel this way about myself. And I know a big part of that was taking my power back.
Yeah.
I really do. I took ownership of me back that day. I can't explain how. I can't explain when it happened. It didn't happen straight away. It took a bit of time. But when I felt that shift happening, the next day it brought me right back to sitting in the room doing restorative justice.
Yeah.
It really did.
Yeah.
And this was before I even started any therapy again or anything. It was just being confident in myself and knowing that I'd done the right thing, which is something I hadn't felt, I don't think, ever.
And we know that people who are victims of sexual crime sometimes, not always, but sometimes, like, start to blame themselves in some way. I mean, a man drove in to the back of my car, and I remember this some years ago, and I got out and to say something, and he convinced me that I had reversed into him. I was stationary. So the human mind, you know, as an adult, I was in a supermarket car park, the man drove into me, but he was busy convincing me that I had reversed into him. Now, that's the most simple of matters. But when you have a child or an adult, you know, vulnerable, I don't mean vulnerable adult, I mean an adult in a relationship or attacked on the street, and the person then starts to act as though this is your fault, or you wanted it, or you brought it on yourself, or something about, or people start to, well, it happened once, but it happened over 4 years. Or why didn't she tell somebody? Yeah. All those kind of hidden messages that sometimes aren't said. Mm-hmm. But for the survivor, can sometimes begin to feel, was there something in this for me? And then all the negative messages come. That all needs to be given right back to the perpetrator. Yeah. This is what you did to me. This is what you took. And you know what? I'm taking back what I'm taking back. And you can have back
the rest.
What's yours. Yeah. All those lies and manipulations and everything else. Here, you can have all those now, and you can take them out when you're leaving the room, because I'm hanging onto them no longer.
The only way that can be done is through restorative justice.
You can try it in therapy with empty chairs and, Gestalt techniques.
Doesn't work.
And I've done it all, I've facilitated it all over a long career. This, that, and the other. I've done the breath work. I've done the whole shebang.
It gets you to a point.
It gets you to a point.
But that's the point. It doesn't get you further from that point.
And it works for some people, but for me, and all the research will support this, the face-to-face meetings. Yeah. And here's is the more powerful. And here's the interesting thing. The more impactful the crime, generally, the greater the outcome for the survivor. And yet, in this country and others, many countries have restorative justice for sexual violence, and we have some here, but not enough. But we're afraid, for the more serious crime. But if we've no resources, we really should, that's where we should be putting it into, because we know there will be a greater impact for victims of sexual and other serious crime, homicide, and the ripple effect, and families.
It changes communities.
Yeah.
And for someone that wants to do restorative justice, like I said at the start, I was meant to do it many times and it never worked out that way. So it was all about the timing for me. But if someone's listening and they think, I'm not ready for that, or I wouldn't be able to do that, or that seems like a lot, is there anything you could say that could just kind of reassure them into thinking that it's not as bad as, it's easy for me to say it as well, obviously, because it worked out so well for me. But for someone that might be doubting themselves that they're not prepared for something like this, is there anything you could say?
Yeah. I would say have a chat with someone, reach out to someone who is doing it. So, I mean, I'm willing to say people can contact me if you want, right? But I'm probably not likely to be available for conversations until into September, because I'm changing jobs. But I am hoping that that the state may well start establishing something into the autumn. It's kind of on the radar, but it's not there. But I'd be very happy people can contact me if they want to discuss. And the thing is to have a chat, or to chat to someone that they know has done it or whatever. Yeah. Because then you get more information, then you can go away and forget about it and then come back to it again. But we need a state service, that's the thing. Yeah. We need education. We need education, we need a state service. And the probation service, let's say, also reach out there. And the probation service have a restorative justice service. The issue there is that they're limited, obviously because of resources, but the restorative justice service in the probation service is confined to victims of perpetrators who are currently on the books of the probation service. So if your perpetrator was never on the books of the probation service or is long off the books or whatever, then, however, the probation service have a victim unit and they would be also willing, I'm sure, to give you help and information.
Brilliant.
I think that perfectly plays back to what you just spoke about before, about the DPP having been able to facilitate if something isn't going to go to the justice system, is there another way?
Another route.
Another option. I'm not going to say every perpetrator is going to go, oh yeah, I go and talk. Like, if they're not going to go to the court system, they're going to be thinking, oh, thank God I'm out of here. But there's possibly some that may.
Yeah.
So that's where that comes in as well, I think.
And just in case there are legal professionals listening, you know, and they say, I'll never be recommending my perpetrator to go, you know, if the DPP is not proceeding,
I understand
I'm going to
that
be
too,
telling
like,
him
yeah.
to
Yeah, keep your
shut his
mouth
mouth closed and go home. Just to say that, you know, this happens in other jurisdictions, and there are legal protections put in. You know, it's not that
So it
you'd
can be arranged.
it can be arranged. There can be all sorts of protections put in. A lawyer said to me, a senior counsel said to me recently, he said, the Mediation Act was the game changer in mediation and legal professionals, because now they have to inform clients who come for civil matters or family law matters. They have to inform them about the possibility of mediation, and would you like to go to mediation? And then if you say no, whatever, then. So this senior counsel was saying to me that the Mediation Act, the fact of the Act, has been a game changer for him in recommending mediation to people. So there may be need in due course for legislation for restorative justice, kind of to protect legal professionals almost, that would recommend it to their clients and to take the fear out of it, Peter. It's all about fear. It's to take the fear out of it. So if legislation is required, you know, we can discuss that further with the Minister for Justice and Company.
Get on to us, Minister.
In the meantime, you know, there is a lot more we can be doing.
Yeah.
I think I'm like, I tell you one thing, I'm a lot more educated on a lot more topics. Like,
I told you she was a good woman.
that's not what you said at all. That's not what you said at all. I can't repeat what she said. No, I just want to say thank you so very much for coming.
Yeah, Marie, thank
Really
you
appreciate
so
it.
much.
Is there anything you'd like to say? Is there anything at all that's jumped out at you that you want to get out into the public domain?
Well, I'd like to thank you both, first of all. It's been, you know, one of the privileges of my life meeting Sophia and now meeting you, Peter.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And they're special, they're privileged journeys, and I take none of it for granted, I can tell you that. Yeah, I'm a long time in this work, in this field, too long that I'm prepared to admit on a podcast. But I've really come to see that there is possibility here for more healing, and so let's go and do it.
This
Let's
works.
do it, yeah. It really does work,
It does.
honestly.
So we call it a day.
Yeah, and we'll attach all Marie's links
Yeah.
into our LinkedIn and the links for her books as well.
Yeah.
And you can grab
Put
them
the
all
links,
there.
yeah. And thank you for listening or watching.
you.
And don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, share, all of those things that we're going to get you to do. I have to ask you to do that. I'm getting easier at asking you. Yeah, just do all the above, please. Thank you.
Thanks, guys, for watching.